Try working backwards from vision to enabling. Rules will efficiently inculcate as apparent roots. It's a cognitive stylization and anti-optimal, where approximations become neonatal satisfaction solutions. Loose bounds for a rationality outflanking algorithm, abstractions are autisticized, operating out of formal bonds. Never to be understood beyond the iterations in glimpses, dead ringer through identikitting the blasé balance of poise. Efficiency models of attributable experimental grids are rerouted through the predictable tests of deficiency and desire. Requiring local calculations, the modulations mimic progress. Options for availability logic or anchored expectation are erroneous. Rare it is to see social proof that stands up to reason. Recognize in others the baselines by which to rhythm boogie, understood as the popular, the grids by which to portion passion. Landmarks of cultural proprioception anchor the cognitive load. Ecological orientation within minimized inaccuracy and risk. Oh, to know the way to happiness. That rationality to critique park. For all else, produce a survey. What to you is contentment? That was a survey I produced when I was 8. Take buffet tables and their etiquettes. Buffetiquettes. Hazard reducing the seductions of fingersuck, conveyor comportment. Unfurl the unconfirmed rumor about bacterial growth regimes. Make bounded efforts not to cross-contaminate crabby efficiency rules. Be appropriate. It is never appropriate to fondle vol-au-vents. Ever. Educational backgrounds are musts for the hierarchical heuristics, decision quickeners for greater accuracy of class contagion, and mirror co-agency. Unbelievably, the knowing nod enables entrance. Must have been the tome tuck. Called out at every high table awkwardness and Hegel-less small talk. Affect is a misnomer, unless rebarbative in Spinoza spin and served as such. Taste is another marker, itemized as the retro of classical cassette racks. Escalation of commitment uniforms up when challenged. Default to other cheek torn, willing into abjection by objectionable ordinances. Gestalts are naturalized as quick think metaphors of progress, untethered to the phrases that birthed them and rapidly reassuring, erroneously vulnerable, but adaptive in always seismic circle jerk, severing with sanction those overexposed by heuristic refusal and defiance. Scope neglect is not anonymous. It's a peak end rule, socialized. It's kind of baffling, that poem. I don't know why I wrote that. Anyway, another poem that I wrote, again, sort of finding ways to pretend that I have inspiration and trying to create stuff. There's a book on modernism and autism, which is fascinating, but I can't remember the name of it. But they have a list of potentially literarily expressed autistic traits, which are very interesting. And so what I did, I produced a poem which sort of riffed on those. Contra-expressivities, it's called. It's quite long. It's like quite prosy. I'm going to read some of it. Contra-expressivities. Abrupt shifts in moods and temperament are loss leaders intubated. The inbred self-effaced becomes a theoretically visceral reaction to the absent I. Your absence is abhorrently infertile to sharing life moments and happy hefts, as was the learned abstruseness set to furrow almost a friend's brows and adult precocious sayers. You dilated ad nauseum about Donne, whose fun was underrated in this class, until the adept astuteness of English teachers enabled brief furloughs. Learning that aphorisms are heuristics was a voice drop moment, a single armpit hair anagnorisis. Delighting in the arbitrary ways in which humans attach meaning to pattern phraseology. Out of the magic of Marlowe developed the vocabulary to extend when you knew it was a fraud. And the bareness of others' intuitions become the workshop of note-taking and rote learning, as the circular logics of language games were distressed and reworked, wonky with purpose. Watching the wagon wheels wheel and wheel and wheel and wheel and degrammaticalize their drag. You mistake myth-making and mechanical appraisal for creativity and curiousness. There is also a mystique miasma around despair. It's something too old for your apperception. Like, who despairs at the disinterment of dictatorial dialogic of the everyday? Is it strange to point to the eccentricities of table manners or modes of politeness, you ask, curiously? Or to delight in silent echolalia of teachers and preachers and leechers whose grammar offends? The horror of the 5 syllables of ejaculation prevented its mimological achievement. For every other interaction, there was the empty space where apparent empathy resided, at least before an understanding about how erratic definitions are in their unsolicited remarks. The tactics of evasion become complex and sketch, rationalized as downtime. Let others exclaim or complain or remain. The absorbers of such freak penance. The swoosh lines of apparent order and cleanliness are wonky. Rather, the fractured and fragmented dimensions sick. Better to pin one's futility the inutility of beauty rather than the appearance of such. And through the fragments find these hermetic incidents of order, like the geometric relations of hand gestures, or the fixation on the entropic seep from the hermeticism of codes of conduct between family units pondered too long. Hiding from hiding became a hiding to nothing, as did uber-rationalized entrapments to solution. Reveal an idiosyncrasy like sensitivity, and the Bristol sharks scrimmage down, calling out M&S skates. Crippled by emotion means an inflexible grasp of others' responsibilities and how they are spoiled. I'm not going to read this whole thing because it's long. But I should have said Bristol Sharks. I used to play for an ice hockey team called the Bristol Sharks. And my parents weren't very wealthy, or weren't wealthy at all, both teachers. And I had some cheap skates, and someone was laughing at me because they thought that I had skates from M&S. That's the reference there. Anyway, although M&S is posh, I don't understand. I think anyway. So the last poem in this book, for anyone who's where am I at? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? What's the time? All right, excellent. So the last poem in this book is called, it's a long poem sequence, and it's based on Mayakovsky's Pro Eto, which is wonderful, which is translated as What's That? And so I did a sort of perverse version of his. And the poem explores woodworking, which is a passion of mine now, and passion, and because I like it. But also the diagnosis of ASD, which came when I was 40. I'm really old, I'm 43. So it came when I was 40. And so the idea of this is it's a long poem which is talking about a non-specified woodworking project, but also about the process of being diagnosed. I'm really bad at writing about myself. So it's sort of cryptic crip is like I like to call it. Cryptic crip. Let's call it that. So anyway, so I'm going to read a few sections of this. So it starts, it goes inception, research, and other bits and bobs, and it has a final bit. So I'll read a few sections of this. So inception, and also for anyone who buys it, it's got lovely pictures of my woodwork in here. As well as my notebooks. And by the way, if anyone wants to commission any pieces from me, please do. Not poems, woodwork, or poems. What's that standing in the stead of ego, twickle germ returning through the prickly tickling of perk? She laughed at, but with you, in ribald recognition, humiliated in the atrium of discussing dovetails in draw design. Angle poised with speaker phone peaking, the rebuild in punky. I could do that. You are that, she perked knowledgeably. The deference to the defamiliar, sitting looking stimmy, wincing, without a picking pencil or ordered pages set soft to accept. While all around abound with apparent surety and pep. Gazes point to creeps who creep, and those are noted down. Alongside designs about containing gestures, and on the flip side of anagrams of their names, or of the new poses in their presence. They would prefer, their faces demure, not to read these extrusive extrusions, these knuckle-kneaded needs stuck to paper like leaves. You should go, she said, deferring decision-making to others, meaning instruct to point obstruct in the insightful direction of finding reason, in the frightful conception of mining misprision. I could make it with, what's that? The purloined plywood ain't pretty, nor's the chipboard. Budgets dictate, make do to do make. You keep forgetting the words, the wood terms, glossary. There's also a great glossary of wood terms in here. And self-chastise at the ambition of projects. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, in all but internalization. A new terminological imperative crosswords out, like leximania, manic on making more, becoming as ever the through which to analyze. The propriolexiceptive sensoria of almost sensate states. It might explain things, she said, as if more explain rations are all that are required to rewire the shit brick house into a satisfactory atelier of the self. In counselling, find the linguo labyrinth to confine. Deprecate deferent before a game purveyor, GP, who ably and charmingly tippy types an affirmation on an NHS antique green screen with indexes assenting against odds to referral ferule. Fingers scarred and dented with non-dexterity, your first foray into graded papers post-generative, and the patronage of an impatient purveyors of hardware. Now I know more than you, RS. Ron Swanson. It might help your confidence, she burred. Why the barbs of behavioural bonhomie, where civilization requires a barbarism of beneficence, exhausted with the exhortations to ordinary order? The basic premises of actualizing this design elude you. But the faithful familiars of research, realization, and reach motivated the marquetry of manic conception, the method, the performance of readying for answers. It's the American dream of self-realization, and identity police are ticking all to ordered organum, arrangement of arguments for auguries of alienation and angst. But wherefore the penal, stubbed at birth? A spectrum of possibilities pervade, as if in rebirthed animation of ways to withstand the wearisome worry of how to be and other tritenesses, titillating tonsures, like how to take this image and actualize craftily. The first meeting with materials is fraught with imposing postures. Distrust distakes the absolute commitment to answering firm facts without the critical intervention of tool blindness or the ignorance of differentiating plain meanings. There are loads of puns in here. Plain meanings. Brilliant. The idea of refining the hatred from the hasty sieves takes a while to percolate towards tender surrender, but the gentle hand levelling lucidity with care comes from somewhere unrecognized, though still distrusted. The surprise is at the weight, or the patience, or nascence of baby thought, remembering that adolescent conversation about immaturity, a restlessness, read temperamentality, ergo abnormal. You can't get the chamfer tool to bite the jagged edges. Got to take those notes just in case of deviance and rage at the correlation between abundance and breathless passivity. No excuses, no excuses, no excuses. Wincing at the trauma split of poor wokemanship on relationships. So we go from inception and we'll skip forward as if we've just all made a little piece together. And now we're finishing. We're putting our finishing touches on it. Despite the excessive consumption of research, realization is restrained and postponed in the pathos-free pathological avoidance of demanding ends. Scripts are followed with an aptitude lifelong honed from model words. As the echolalia of looking likes resonate a pattern in the delicate kerf. Kerf, by the way, is the stuff that's taken out when you chop something. So if you've got a bit of wood and you chop it in half, it's not in half because you've taken out stuff, and that's called kerf. No, it's an educational book too. Knowing one feeling of absolute certainty extracted from those formal inventories and from the subtle and complex proportions hoping grace is lamentably an impossibility, a heady stew of never enough, and nearing the tough refrain of the well-ish darn. But there is satisfaction in the choice of movement from 80 to 120 to 120 grits, and the loving strokes to evoke seeming hard works from soft flirts. readying the fibers for their trouble-free reception of dyes, making allegorical the blotchy imperfection of not being primed for coping. These multiplying inequities are straining and offer permanent reproach, implying a solvency of sensation. As if these are algorithms of allowance, the frameworks of stolid certainty are glued tight and delineated by the absolute relativities of fate. Surfaces prepared and tainted now, patience begins, and the fallout of too much zoning fills the interims. You try to hold off the trite metaphors, but the confluence of conflict in the idle hours obscured by the liberating labour of just saps. Stir, 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 and watch the muddy resins merge with watery suspensions, readying the bristles of the brush to caress into order, to begin at the archly unreceptive edges and sally forth. There's something soothing in having found fair descriptors, those smoothing out edges, phrases, and brushstrokes by which to cover a lifetime's inaccuracies. They cannot, however, be constrained by craft, as the delicate stoop to shine always soils the surface gleam. The challenges of confronting the leap after the high ledge of diagnosis are comparable to the never quite finished varnish applications. I'm not sure in what ways, but the literature describes it thus, and the burrs of surface setter and fibres are not enough to hamper. In passing out the puzzlements of the crasis of craft with crass corporeality, new constellations are created, parts of which peer through semi-sense. Next to silent acceptance, this was the mode chosen, though the allure, the one-sided, is ever present, other absence. Such an accounting as this is just that, a codicological enterprise of chancery, a grammatological masquerading as knowing, nodding etiology. Through the inherent infinity of the possibility of personal paysage comes the strive for sapience, unfocused in the knots of words. But the playful skipping of handmade waste words on water, or the patient unpicking of craft and its implicatures, or the reckless extension of a daft connection between woodwork and wordwork may fail to thrill, or in its will instill the hope to cope, thaumatrope. So that's the end of What's That Instead of Ego. And because I didn't want to be considered sort of a one-trick pony, I've been writing some follow-up poems from a sequence called What's That Instead of Ego 2? Acrostic Aftermaths. He's back and more autistic. Is the tagline. But because I'm not an inspired poet and I have to do tricks, all of these are acrostics. So I'm just going to read one of these. Some of those who follow me on the Instagrams might have seen me read some of these. If not, you don't have to follow me, but I hope to publish these. So they're written sort of shorthand like that, and then I write them up. And this one's called What's the TK? And then involuntary wince is the phrase I use, and then I write the acrostic like that. So anyway, this is involuntary wince. Invasive ungratefuls awkwardly arranging sporadic infiltrates with traits, nonsensing out internal routines and rhythms like withering entreats to honest stim. Volition is half resisted, half insisted, a dialectic of phenomenologically felt and nuomen necessity. Offcuts usually saved to draft life file, leavening the otherwise amiable with the awry awake. Unctuous, but unintended as such, as much a myth ennobler or confirmation bias. Need is naively misrepresented in research and psychoanalytics, fucks critical thought, tediously terrorizing tickers with libido exegesis, citing self-erasure as agnanoresis embrasure. Wow. A long century of censorious catheterizing of characteristics, funnel, refuse, and confuse. Rather Lang's lucubrations than twaddle, a step towards liberation of sorts. Yes, unleash the sibilant seismographically distress as it does, sanity simulating. wince and mumble also, whenever whatever endeavours a sursuplage of sensoria, instilling as they do the will to control the otherwise inexorable stall to reason. Necessity, then, is not to falter before the presentiments of the fully apparent, crippled by the convocations of conformity into curating spaces for others' spaces. Extension of the ennoblement of urge expression, rue not the disablement of impression. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.